Is Spencer Dyer, and I'm here to talk to you today about the European powers in the Atlantic. Now, the Atlantic refers to the trade that occurred across the Atlantic Ocean between Europe and the New World. The New World is the Americas, recently discovered by Christopher Columbus. Now, some of the major countries involved in this Atlantic trade are England, France, Spain, and Portugal. And England settled in the east coast of North America. France decided to settle in the northern area of North America. Spain settled in Central America and the northern tip of South America. And Portugal settled in eastern South America, or mostly Brazil. England in the Atlantic trade, um, where they settled was important because in modern day it developed into the United States. England had a policy of forcing the indigenous people to follow their beliefs, culturally and religiously. They used violent force as a means of forcing the indigenous people to denounce their faith. While not immediately the most influential, England was still fairly influential throughout the Atlantic trade, and they would eventually rise to the top of influence. France in the Atlantic trade settled in the northernmost part of North America, which became Canada in modern day. France built many major forts that would develop into major modern cities such as Quebec, Montreal, Detroit, and Green Bay. Spain in the Atlantic trade settled in Central America and the northern tip of South America, and this is important because there was an abundance of silver in these areas. And Spain, in contrast to England, had a policy of integrating the indigenous people into their culture and into their families. This led to many mixed cultural families, or they were known as Creoles. And this mixing of cultures led to a very unique hierarchical caste system within these colonies. At the very top, you had the pure-blooded Spaniards who controlled everything. In the middle, you had the Creoles, and depending on how pure the Spanish blood was in your family, you were more important in the caste system. And at the very bottom were the indigenous people that were forced into labor roles, such as on farms or in the silver mines. Spain, because of the abundance of the silver, and because it was the perfect area to grow very sought after crops such as sugar cane, they became the most important country in the Atlantic trade. Portugal, while rather small, is very important because they paid for Christopher Columbus's journey to find a trade route to India. And because of this, Christopher Columbus accidentally stumbled upon the Americas, which was quickly labeled the New World. Without this journey, there would be no Atlantic trade, and the world as we know it today would not have existed. One of the most important things from the Atlantic trade is the Columbian Exchange. This is the term used for the intentional and unintentional trade of foods, plants, animals, and diseases between the New Worlds of Americas and the European countries. Some plants that are noteworthy from America are the potato and tomato, which are vital to the food we eat today. And on the European side, you have wheat and coffee beans, which are also essential in our daily lives. And without this exchange, parts of the world would just not have access to these. Some animals that are noteworthy are the European horses and cows that they brought over for use on farms and also as a source of food, and the American turkey, which has become a household staple. Some diseases of note are the European smallpox and measles, which when brought over to the Americas devastated the indigenous populations, and the American disease syphilis. Some economical impacts of coming to the New World are, because of the vast amounts of gold and silver found in the New World, the European economy declined or even crashed in some places. However, despite this economic downfall, there was still room for plenty of economic growth with all of these new cash crops that have been found in the Americas, namely tobacco, and the Americas were perfectly suited for the growth of sugarcane. Religion in the New World is strange because in some places the indigenous people were forced to worship the European faiths, and in others they were taught to accept the European faith. And so in some regions it was a very forceful transition of religion, and in others it was a slow integration. One of the more increasing and popular religions in Europe was the Protestant faith. And within France, this increasing of popularity caused tension between the Catholic population and the Protestant population. Now, because of this conflict, there was a huge political debate and almost war between the Catholic and Protestant population. And despite an effort to have a peaceful end to this conflict, the Queen Mother, Catherine de' Medici, enacted a plan to murder thousands upon thousands of Protestant civilians. Another major conflict in Europe at the time was the 30-Year War. This war broke out after the Austrian Prince Ferdinand, a Catholic man, was crowned the ruler of the Protestant state of Bohemia. And when he was crowned, he sought after massive changes to religion in the state, trying to force people back to Catholicism. And this was met with protest by Protestant aristocrats within the state. And from this protest, the now King Ferdinand sent military action to try and repress these people. And because of this military action, allies of the Protestants declared war upon King Ferdinand. And this declaration of war spurred allies of King Ferdinand to also join in a war. And this led to allies of allies of allies joining in on the war, leading to conflict across all of Europe. And this conflict severely hindered European power of the time. Now, the decline of Spain had many contributing factors. One of the largest was the overabundance of silver brought to the Spanish economy. Because so much silver was brought to Spain, the value of their currency was completely tarnished, and the prices of everything was raised to astronomical levels. Another factor was the 30-Year War. They spent a lot of their resources and manpower joining in on the effort, leading them to have a lack of these resources and manpower for the Atlantic trade. Another very important factor was the trading of slaves from Africa to the New World for the use of cheap labor. Spain had a very, very small presence in this trade. And this trade of slaves was so profitable that it caused England to rise above Spain in terms of influence over the Atlantic trade. And England rising above Spain caused power shifts within the Atlantic trade. With Spain's influence gone, it allowed for other countries to become much more powerful, namely Great Britain and England. With the decline of Spain, England was able to control most of the trade between Europe and the New World, and they also controlled most of the trade between African slaves and the Americas. Now, despite this being a very profitable era for Europe, it had to come to an end. And it partially came to an end because of the decline of Spain's massive power over the world. Spain had such a contribution to the Atlantic trade and from Europe and the Americas that when they lost their powers, it caused major difficulties in continuing this Atlantic trade. However, what finally ended this era was the English Civil War, ignited by the crowning of James Stewart. There was a massive argument between the Parliament of England and the crowning of James because he was a Scottish man. And despite being the cousin of the recently deceased Queen Elizabeth, there was huge fights between the Parliament because they didn't want a Scottish man ruling the English country. This led to a massive decline in power for England, and with England losing a lot of their power, it caused the end of the power of the Atlantic trade. While it still continued on after this, it was never the same.